I'm Becky Mayer, and welcome to Transitions, Body, Mind, Spirit. Transitions. We all know transitions in our life. I particularly like to use the metaphor of triathlons. That's where you first swim, and then you get to the transition area, then you bike, and then you get to another transition area, and then you run. That's a big metaphor for our lives. And I've really enjoyed over our season talking to various people on how they change from one thing to another. And today we have Lynn Cothren, who, think of a small child in a small town in Tennessee, and think of that child going from that to being a personal assistant to Coretta Scott King, a personal assistant to the CEO of all the Girl Scouts, and lots of things in between. That child going on national TV with Oprah. And what an interesting thing. So we have our interesting person here, Lynn Cothren. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Becky.
Yes. Now, tell us of your humble beginnings in Tennessee, in a small town, and what made you decide to leave that small town as a young man and start your transitional journey in your life.
Well, growing up in Lincoln County, south here of Nashville, the opportunity for work or possibilities, particularly if you were a gay individual, was a barrier. And at that time, you didn't necessarily feel safe in that community. So early on, I knew that I had to move to a larger city. And most gays, 30 years ago would go to San Francisco or New York to begin their journey. A lot of Southern gay men and women moved to Atlanta in the 80s, and that's where I found myself. And I went there initially to go to art school at the Art Institute of Atlanta. And in going to school, I went to work at the King Center, which is the living memorial to Martin Luther King Jr. that was founded by Coretta Scott King in 1968 after Dr. King's assassination. So being a 19-year-old and being in Atlanta and then feeling a sense of freedom of my sexual liberty, being gay in Atlanta.
And you could say those words
and
then.
I could say it, and I could be gay, and I could be comfortable with who I was, the way God had made me for the first time. And though being at the King Center, initially it was a job, but once I got involved in it, I realized the importance of the work, and particularly the social justice movement that Dr. King and Mrs. King led in this country, in the civil rights movement. And the more years involved, after 23 years, I really understood the impact of how things can change in our country if you continue to work in the struggle, and how far we came from Dr. King's assassination to establishing Dr. King's birthday as a national holiday.
Wow.
And I was fortunate enough to start before the holiday and work on that with Mrs. King and the rest of the staff. And it was just a great honor to see that we have a national holiday, the only American holiday named after an African American or any American, for fact, because Columbus is the only other national holiday, and he was not an American. So that unique opportunity really was, it was a tremendous growth period, and it really grounded me in my commitment to social justice issues and bringing about social change, whether it was in women's rights issues or GLBT issues or civil rights issues. They're all interconnected, and Dr. King talked about how the triple evils, poverty, racism, and war, and how they were interconnected. And so we know that the movement is interconnected in how we bring about social justice and change in our society. And knowing that Mrs. King didn't herself live to see the first African-American elected president, but she did see Nelson Mandela released from jail and get to welcome him to this country and being a part of that celebration. And knowing that over 50 years, 30 years, my experience with Mrs. King, the 23, but it's been 30 now of how I've seen change, not only in this country and in the South, but throughout the world. And if we are fortunate, Mrs. King's mother used to say, if you live long enough, you'll understand.
Well, let's go back to, you're the 19-year-old in Atlanta, and you get this part-time job, right, at the King Center. And I would like to know, how did that little start began, and somehow or other, you became a administrative assistant, I guess, to
Well,
her?
I never had that title. I would love to say that that was a great skill set that I have, but it's not. I became a great confidant and friend of Mrs. King. My title varied from the director of her office of community outreach to special assistant. So I had a variety of titles in the capacity of working with Mrs. King. But I think the best title that, you know, that she gave was as her special assistant. Back in the day, she would say that during Lyndon Johnson's time, the most top senior position was not a chief of staff, was special assistant. That meant the person that was the gatekeeper, the person that everyone had to go through. Over the years, we've changed it to chief of staff, but at that time, to her, that was the role of chief of staff, was her special assistant. So everything came through the special assistant.
So to define what you did, you were the gatekeeper for all the media people. I'm trying to get a little sense of how this transitioned
I started
into
out as a copy boy, and
Right.
then ended up being a file clerk, and then
Yes.
understanding her filing system when no one else did, so then I could find stuff when no one else could find it.
Okay.
And then the relationship grew into such a relationship that I then became the person that would oversee the speech writing in terms of working with the speechwriter and making sure that we hit the topics that we wanted to hit. Then taking over her scheduling. And some of this happened because people were retiring. And as they retired,
Then you picked up the ball.
they said, well, Lynn, this is a new responsibility. So the last 16 years with Mrs. King, I basically oversaw all of the operation of her business side of speaking, booking her engagements,
Wow.
coordinating all of her traveling all over the world with her. I was fortunate enough to travel to Africa many times, but we traveled to Europe and in Asia.
So you were physically there with her
Right.
as an assistant,
Exactly.
doing whatever needed to be done.
Absolutely, whatever needed to be done, and it was sort of the call of service. I mean, being a servant leader, being in a position. You know, Dr. King often talked about the greatest among you is the servant, referring to in the Bible. And so working in my life's work, I've always felt that being in a place of being able to serve the principal or the individual, that could be my greatest contribution in terms of them bringing about the social justice or change that they were working at. So it was always a great honor and a privilege to be in a position to do whatever I could do to make Mrs. King's work easier. And I think that's how we ended up so tight, because she knew—
On a personal level.
On a personal level, a very personal level. She had an assistant that was her personal assistant. I was her special assistant. Personal assistant dealt with her clothes, her hair, her makeup, and you know, some of accounting issues, and was with her as long as I had been with her. But we all made a very good team and understood the important work that, you know, Mrs. King was doing was continuing the legacy of Dr. King. I mean, creating the national holiday by building the King Center, you know, being a single woman at the time of Dr. King's assassination and taking on the responsibility of building a national memorial or international memorial to Dr. King in Atlanta that was not just a resting place, but also a place that people could come and learn about the movement and nonviolence. And she piloted programs that were used in South Africa for the first election. We were in South Africa or in Haiti, or, you know, using Kingian methodology and nonviolence. So, you know, being a part of that and working with her, you know, it's like it was a grow into job. So it was not like you know, 19, I moved to Atlanta and I got to do all this stuff. I grew into it, and it fit. We were sort of like peas and carrots. We went really well together.
It sounded like there was an incredible level of trust. And for somebody to be a confidant, a trusting, she trusted you to take care of things, and that level of trust increases as she asks more and more and more and more of you. And also to travel to Africa, you want somebody to support you, to be there for you. And it sounds like that was your role, and like you didn't want the spotlight, you were helping her be in the spotlight.
Oh, absolutely. The thing that was so unique about our relationship, I think, and that a lot of people didn't understand, how is this white gay man, you know, from rural South,
Right.
with Coretta Scott King, the wife of Martin Luther King Jr., the leader of the civil rights struggle in the United States through 1955 to 1968. Now, how did it all happen? And I think that God puts you where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And I've always seen that throughout my life, wherever I end up at. It wasn't a planned thing, but I think, you know, whatever you believe in, and you know, if you believe in something, and I'm a believer in something, and I know that I'm there for a reason, or was put there for a reason. And I think Mrs. King felt we had this conversation, she felt the same way. We both served each other on a personal level as friends, but you know, it's different when it becomes chosen and you choose each other, and it's more than just a boss and employee relationship.
You had made reference before about a feeling of family, a chosen part of family, and that there sounded like almost a family type relationship, that you were so close in helping each other. But do you feel that some of the people around her resented you because you were a white man amongst
Oh,
black?
absolutely. I mean, she got flack for the fact that, you know, she had a gay white man traveling outside of the country with her, even some of her board members. But I remember her telling me the situation, and the board members, and what she told them. And she didn't pick me because I was white or because I was gay. She picked me because I took care of business and I took care of her.
There you go.
And so once Mrs. King laid the law down, most people sort of backed off. They didn't challenge her. Once they would come with to her with a challenge, she was very capable, you know, of letting him know this is the way it's going to be, and it subsided. I think that those that really knew of our relationship understand, and then some. I mean, I think even at times her children wondered. It's like, well, you know, Lynn knows more about what's going on than we do about certain things, and so it was always very interesting. But you know, I've got a wonderful family. I've got a beautiful mother that is almost 80 years old and works 4 days a week waiting on tables, and her work ethic is what is within my DNA. And I have 5 sisters and a brother.
Wow.
I come from a wonderful biological family that if I could have chosen them, I think I would have chosen them, even though we're all quite different. But when you get to choose your family outside of your biological family, that's even a greater blessing in a sense, because you know, sometimes you got people in your family you don't really care about. I'm fortunate that I like most of mine, and most of the time they like me. But when I get to be in a situation that I've been able to choose my family or be chosen, it's when you talk about spiritual, it's then when you have that good feeling and good people around you that help make you a better person, and knowing that, you know, that you're doing something that's better for humanity. If they're like people that you're around, if you, you know, it's sort of like they say, you are what you're around. So if you surround yourself with good thinking, good right-minded people, then you'll tend to be in that, you know, vein.
Right, and you attract what you are, too,
Absolutely.
if you are good thinking and all that. Now let's talk about the next transition. After 23 years with her, then there was the next part, and I believe that was when you worked with Kathy Cloninger, with the CEO of all the Girl Scouts?
All the girls in the United States.
Now, and again, there is somebody named Lynn who is a male working for the Girl Scouts. I mean, you've kind of like found these niches that is a little different than what one would think.
Well, I think it's interesting. Again, God puts you where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. Kathy was making a great transformation with Girl Scouts. As part of that transformation, I was brought in part of the reorg.
And she also came from Tennessee.
She came from Tennessee, and no, we did not know each other. We didn't know each other before New York. And actually, I came in as a third candidate. They had already selected the candidate pretty much. And Girl Scouts like to have 3 candidates, sort of make sure that it was fair and just, you know, process. And So I came in, and I think because of where I worked with Mrs. King, and because my name is Lynn, that initially when I was brought in, they thought that I was a black female. And they thought, you know, diversity, we want to bring diversity into Girl Scouts. But once I went through the interview process with the
and
various
she saw
committees,
you.
me and her sat down together like for the third interview for this job, and it was just an automatic connection. I knew that, like Mrs. King, Kathy is so committed to the work of making the world a better place for young women and developing leadership. I mean, her commitment was there, and it was really totally in line with the work that I'd been doing with Mrs. King in terms of social justice. And I never thought of the Girl Scouts as a movement or a social justice kind of thing. But then once I got back from it and realized that in a country that doesn't have wonderful leaders, and that there's a void when 50% of women make up the population, but only 12% make up leadership positions. But Girl Scouts is producing, you know, depending on which sector, you know, anywhere between 80 Fortune 500 to 78% of elected officials, 100% female astronauts. It is a movement, and Kathy is leading this great movement of educating and helping young girls become tomorrow's leaders. And knowing that, you know, Girl Scouts at the time was not quite 100 years old, and that women haven't, you know, had the right to vote, not even 100 years in this country, and how important Juliette Gordon Lowe, who was the founder of Girl Scouts, and how Kathy was probably the most transformational leader of Girl Scouts since its founder. It was the most exciting opportunity to be right back like I was with Mrs. King and the work that she was doing in the social justice movement.
There you are. I mean, you just kind of fell into these different things, and there you are, social justice. And I can see the thread of social justice, whether it's the black movement or girls or gay, it's all about social justice and being fair with everyone.
Oh, absolutely. And again, if you know, I'm a very young man, but
how old are you?
will be 51 tomorrow, actually.
Yes. Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you. And it's a blessing. But I've found in my short life, particularly by my experience with Mrs. King, that, you know, change is hard for people, even people that talk about wanting change.
I mean,
real
if you're
change.
prejudiced,
whether it's prejudiced or it's about changing our attitudes toward women in leadership roles. You know, the idea of having a woman president for us to even be, you know, saying, you know, well, when will it be? When will it happen? Well, now's a good time. And I think, but if we live long enough, if we really work long enough at caring about the issues and knowing that you never get the whole pie in one sitting, you have to work at it a slice at a time. And that you have to protect your slice once you get it, and that the movement continues. The struggle for social justice never ends. It's continuous, but the one thing that if you have lived long enough, you can see from whence you've come. I lived long enough to see Ellen kicked off of TV because she was a lesbian, and now I see that she is the top-rated talk show host in the country in the afternoon. So if you live long enough, you see attitudes change in this country. And we already know that I worked on a campaign back in the 80s where Cracker Barrel legally fired all of its gay and lesbian employees.
Because they were gay.
Because they were gay. And that's legal, and it's still legal in this country. They're not protected in many states throughout the country. But I've lived to come back to Tennessee and see that Cracker Barrel is now the largest contributor to GLBT issues in Tennessee.
And GLBT?
Gay and lesbian transgendered issues here in the state.
They are a contributor?
They're the largest contributor to those issues here in the state. So where they would fire, you know, 20 years ago or more, and had a very they changed their policy, and now they're one of the largest contributors because they realized that one day you have to stand on the right side of history. You have that opportunity to see where are we going, not only as a community, but as a state and as a country and as a world, and understanding that we're all interconnected and all interdependent, that we're, you know, what affects one affects the other. And it's based in the King philosophy, but it's a great world house. So, you know, he talked about when you leave your house in the morning, if you had coffee, it came from Colombia. If you have clothes, they're made in Japan. Americans, when they leave home, you know, they've already been around the world, and if they turned on Good Morning America, they've traveled all over the world. So we have to understand that we're part of a great world house that Dr. King described, and we have to remember that in our own communities, our small communities, that even in the small communities, you've been to Africa, you've been to China, because you've got products or things that have affected you that have come from those areas. So that's the movement.
Now, I know that you have met some real additional celebrities also, and we have some photos of which will show that you and Oprah, I believe.
Yeah, I had the great opportunity during the Cracker Barrel campaign to meet Miss Winfrey for the first time, who originated here in Nashville.
Now there's a Nashville connection.
A Nashville connection, but I didn't know her in Tennessee, but I did get to go do her show, and it was one of the first times in this country that a national show took on the issue about job discrimination against gays and lesbians in this country. And if you go back, before then, there were, you know, there were shows that were sexually titillating, but not real issue-oriented shows about the life of gay and lesbian people in this country. And so Miss Winfrey took on reporting about what had happened at Cracker Barrel and how the injustice of it, and not taking a side, but enlightening the community. And that's really why we have a change in attitudes in this country, is that really consciousness of educating people, because a lot of people just didn't know that it's legal even now today to fire people based on their sexual orientation.
Quite think about that either, really. So you say that must be the son of Miss Winfrey when I think of Oprah, but
well, I mean, you know, I think if I'm with Oprah and it's her and I refer to her as Oprah. If I'm talking about her, I refer to her as Miss Winfrey, like I would refer to Mrs. King as Mrs. King. You know, in the South, and I learned this by being at the King Center, particularly because I'm a Southerner, and black people of Mrs. King's generation, particularly her father, and I was made aware of it, and it's just out of respect, because her father would be called out by his first name by a kid, you know, a white kid. That was a form of Jim Crow and discrimination, and it's just out of respect. So I expect, my expectation is that I want people to respect my mom that are younger, and I would, you know, I don't introduce my mother as this is, you know, this is Miss Cothren. You know, I want children to respect her, and it's a Southern, you know, respect thing. It's a Southern thing, and I can't bring myself to call people in their first name unless, you know, if they're at a certain age, without them saying, don't call me that name, and then even still would publicly, I would refer to them as their surname. I mean, it's just, it's a Southern.
Okay, all right, and I think we also have a picture of you and Maia Anjelou.
Dr. Anjelou, yes.
And tell us how that relationship became so close.
Well, I had been working with Dr. Betty Shabazz, who was Malcolm X's widow, and had become very close friends, and didn't realize that we would end up being so close. And when she was in the fire that took her life, Dr. Anjelou called me up on that day, and we had known each other and had been together, but she said, Lynn, I understand how close you were my sister Betty. And now you'll be a son of mine. And it's been since that time that she and I have not let each other go, because, you know, Dr. Anjelou has lived and had seen so many of her friends like Dr. Shabazz and Mrs. King, her sister friends, and she worked for Dr. King and she worked for Malcolm X. I mean, she's had such a great life that there are a few people that she can relate to on a certain level. So we've been together over 30 some odd years now, and we get to spend.
You and Maia Anjelou.
Yes.
Oh,
we get to spend time together, quality time. Like Easter is one of our holidays that we spend together, and
that is so cool.
we color eggs and we send them to the church. We have a great time.
Wow. Now we're coming down to the last few minutes, I would like to know what is next for Lynn. What is next on the table? What amazing things?
Well, I turned 50, and I'd been in New York for almost 9 years, and it was time for a change. I moved back south because I wanted to be closer to my family.
Back to the small town.
Back to Fayetteville, Tennessee. And I knew what I had been doing the last year in New York. I'd been doing consulting work, and I've been doing it since I moved back to Tennessee for different individuals or different organizations. So I've most recently taken on the responsibility as Chief of Staff to Martin Luther King III, which is the eldest son of Dr. King and Mrs. King. And at a time that it's sort of a full circle moment. It allows me an opportunity to stay in Tennessee in my beautiful home in the south, south of Nashville, but it takes me back to Atlanta to see many of my friends and chosen family members there. And working with Martin in his deep commitment for social justice, and really particularly he is concerned about poverty in this country and the reality that it has not changed that much since his father's time. And in fact, it's gotten worse in many cases. And even here in Tennessee, we've seen how poverty is linked to a meth problem in the country, when 75% of all methamphetamines is produced in Tennessee.
75%, gosh.
So, so poverty and drug addiction, HIV infections, they're all interconnected. Again, it gets back to Dr. King's philosophy of poverty, racism, and war, and how racism and poverty and how they feed off of each other are ignorant. So, Martin's commitment to working particularly with uplifting poor people in this country is something that I'm so excited to have the opportunity to help him and serve him, to get him out there and be a voice.
Martin III.
Martin III.
Right.
To be that change in social justice issues.
Wow. And here you have done full circle from being in the small town, being all over the world with all these celebrities, and now you're back in the same small town, but still venturing out, and now with the next generation, Coretta Scott King's son, and still a young man.
Yes. And
do you have any, just a quick thought of what might be the next transition even after that, or who knows?
Again, a life that's plotted, I think, can be very boring. And my life has always been, again, when you're called to serve, you answer the call.
Called to serve.
And it's in keeping with, God putting you in the place that you need to be in for the individual that you want to serve or work with, and being an individual that can freely give of self. I don't know what the future, but it's been so exciting so far. It's like, how you could,
Wow, without planning, look at all the wonderful things you've been into.
Sort of let go and let God. And if you just sort of let it go and give it up, and if you really have to let it go, though.
Yes.
And that's the thing about it. A lot of people will talk about letting go,
yes,
but they hang on to it because they're trying to fix it or move it in a certain direction. But if you let it go, if you follow allow yourself to be in the plan.
All right. Well, Lynn Cothren, thank you very, very much for your insightful wisdom, and what a wonderful journey. Talk about some transitions. Wow. And thank you all for watching. And this is Transitions, Body, Mind, Spirit. Becky Mayer, thanks.